Welcome to the 34th episode of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been following this series, you understand what we are doing, shining a light on incredibly smart, accomplished people and helping them share stories from their careers and lives, as well as anecdotes about their past, present, and future. Today, I am thrilled to present two of my friends who happen to be at the pinnacle of their respective fields within the music industry. Before we get started, let me take care of a little bit of business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we obviously want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Some of you may know that I am a music industry headhunter. By definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn connection, your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your old friends and make some new ones, and ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible along the way. I also want to thank our sponsors, for without their support, we could not do what we do. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, the Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, Create Tennessee, CreateTennessee.com and the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Four Roses Bourbon, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. Now, let's get down to today's program. Today's interviewer is my good friend, Kevin Casini. Kevin is an attorney, consultant, moderator, professor, and occasional columnist. He's a member of the Recording Academy, Music Business Association, Copyright Alliance, Americana Music Association, and boasts one full-length EP as his BMI credits. He also serves on the nominating committee of the Boston Music Awards, the board of CT Folk, and is a member of the Judge Janet Bond Atherton American Inn of Court. Wow, that's a mouthful. Dedicated to the practice of intellectual property law. Kevin teaches entertainment law at Quinnipiac University School of Law. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Tom.
And joining Kevin as today's special guest is Abby North. Abby is principal of North Music Group, LLC, and is founder of Unchained Melody Publishing, LLC. Abby began her career as a songwriter and composer and launched her first production music library almost 15 years ago. Abby has experience in all areas of music publishing, from creative to administrative. She has vast experience in works registration, strong knowledge of music publishing data and databases, and a background developing royalty processing and CWR works registration software tools. Abby regularly advises estates on catalog management, termination rights, and strategic growth concepts. She's involved in several tech-forward, cutting-edge working groups and initiatives in the music licensing and metadata areas. She consults and advises companies in the financial sector and music industries regarding these issues. Abby is board member of the LA chapter of the AIMP and a member of NMPA's Team 100, the Television Academy, the Guild of Music Supervisors, the CCC, Women in Music, SONA, the SCL, and MMF-US. That's a lot of acronyms, Abby.
It really is.
Please welcome these two amazing guests into the smartest people into the room. Take it away, guys.
Thank you so much, Tom.
This is going to be the easiest part of my week because generally I bug Abby until she calls me back and we have hour-long conversations anyway. So this one is just being videoed. There's really not much difference. But first I want to tell you where I'm coming from today. I'm in Fairfield, Connecticut at the Fairfield Theater Co-op, and FTC, as we know it here, is a nonprofit. They started out putting on shows for students on campus locally, and they've grown to 5 different performance spaces, including the one you see behind me here, the Warehouse. Routinely voted as one of the best music venues in Connecticut. The sound is outstanding and the lighting is great. They're having their gala coming up here in a couple of weeks, and they're looking to raise some money to put on some of their programming. They do everything from spoken word, off-Broadway, dramatical readings, live shows, And on weekends, they provide free music lessons and classes for students, kids. So the children's classes are really the bread and butter of the community here, because when people don't get to see one another, they can still come back for this. And as Connecticut reopens, they're reintroducing some of these things back. And so really looking forward to doing that. So I'm going to put their web address in the chat here. If you want to drop in, check them out, or if you're coming through Connecticut and there happens to be an event happening, please look them up and see if you can lend some time or lend some money to them, because what they do is really, really bolster the idea of giving spaces for performing artists to hone their craft and deliver that expression of that creative message. And it's really, really important right now that we support these independent places, especially the nonprofits. I'll put it in the chat here, and then I'm going to get to Abby, because there's a lot on my mind, Abby, as you know, not the least of which is, when are you going to pick up my catalog? I have 5 credits on that EP, and it's available exclusively to you if you'd like. Seriously, this week just so happens to be MLC week, as the MLC has declared. And there are some programs happening right now where they're talking about what it is, how it can be supported, and then they're going to get into some of the details. And so I think starting with you from a standpoint of talking about data, who's got it, who needs it, what needs to be done with it, is our best jumping off point. You've got a lot of irons and different fires, but I think that's where I learn the most from you when we have these conversations. And so I want to start by asking one question that keeps going back and forth, and I hear ping pongs on it, either yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down. What is better, bad data or no data at all when it comes to metadata?
We're starting right in, aren't we?
Yeah.
Honestly, I think no data is better than bad data, because bad data propagates. And even if you have an opportunity to clean up bad data in one database, it may have already been sent to another that you're not aware of. And the consequence of that is the wrong people may be paid, or nobody's getting paid. So for me, I find it's easier to start from nothing and then be able to provide my own truth.
So the legal hat that I wear says it's always better to hold all the money as long as you can, right? Bad data has the money sent to the wrong person. And then if you're trying to track down your own royalties, you've got to find out who that person is that got it. And then you've got to initiate some type of action to get that money back. Much better from your standpoint than to have it not dispersed at all and sitting in the proverbial black box than it is to have been dispersed improperly. Yeah.
Well, I mean, gosh, it's such a loaded question, because it could be that bad data led to the wrong party being paid. And I've heard the number something like 25% of royalties that get distributed are distributed to the wrong party. So it could be that the wrong party received the money. It could be that nobody got it. It could be that I received less than I was supposed to be receiving. I mean, there's certainly some UGC platforms where we see a lot of we see a lot of Wild West behavior, where a party who maybe isn't entitled to a share at all, or isn't entitled to the percentage they've claimed, receiving money. There might be still money that isn't being claimed at all. And so when the right party goes in, delivers his or her truth, and let's say it's 25%, there might be back pay from the platform, right? Back pay or adjustments from money that wasn't distributed. And so that's relatively easy for us to get, because all we have to do is, assert our claims. And then that platform says, okay, now we know who we were supposed to be paying that, of this undistributed money. But then you have the other party who may have actually collected our money. And that's the scenario you were just describing, where how do I go and get it? Like, the process is we literally have to write the letter to the party we believe collected the money. We have to substantiate our claims and ask for, an agreement that, or an understanding that they did receive our money, and then an accounting. And it's definitely not a simple or easy process.
So the people that would disagree with you, and with me for that matter, would say, well, no data is only good if I know the data sets that I'm looking for, and if I know that it's missing, so I can go find it. But if I don't have any data, then there's nothing that I can work from. And I would prefer bad data, because then at least I know what to correct. And I think maybe from a data entry standpoint, that makes some sense. But from a money collection standpoint, it doesn't, because like I said, once it outflows to the wrong person or the wrong entity, now there's three parties involved that you have to talk about getting together to track things down. I've got to ask whoever sent the money where they sent it and why, and then I have to take that information to that group or that person and prove to them that I know that they got it when I should have gotten it. And it could be that they're ne'er-do-wells and have, put themselves in my position and taken my stuff. But it also could be that they don't even realize that they got the money improperly, right? In a bulk payment or in a quarterly that just gets distributed to them. Maybe they don't get around to reviewing them as quickly as I do. And so I think it's a bell that you can't unring once it happens, or it's very difficult to do so. And then the time spent and the money spent trying to track those things down lead you to take your eye off the ball someplace else. And so I'm with you. I think I'd rather have a blank slate than bad data. But there are some people in some very high positions right now that don't agree with me. They think differently and don't agree with you either. So right. If you're a writer and you're not dealing with publishing and you're not dealing with labels, but you want to try to line yourself up best, what's the best action step you can take as the writer right now to make sure?
So there's so much focus right now on the MLC because it's about to launch. And I think that writers traditionally have been pretty familiar with the concept of performance royalties because they all know, hey, let's join ASCAP, let's join BMI. But for most writers, I think like the mechanical, and particularly the streaming mechanical, is a very foreign concept. So the upside or downside of that is many of those writers, their works may not even exist in the Harry Fox database yet. Yeah. Harry Fox being the vendor of the MLC. That might be a good thing, because if they don't exist yet, it's a perfect opportunity for songwriters who are self-administered to assemble their data in one place and begin to deliver it to the MLC or to Harry Fox or both. And also, by the way, MRI, music reports. So if I can deliver it, clean, and it's based upon my truth right from the get-go, that's ideal. But then, and I don't know if you wanted me to segue this take this opportunity to do that, but we have the MLC has created this data quality initiative program, which I love because it allows rights holders to deliver reports, the writer report, the works report, and the alt titles report with their data, their truth, to the MLC, and then in return, they receive a report that identifies the disparate data between the Harry Fox database and the rights holder's truth. And that's tremendous because, listen, every database has issues. I don't know that there's any database that's a completely clean representation of the truth, but we have this MLC is so new that this is a great focus point. So if we get this data from the MLC in the data quality initiative report format, we can see what's apparently wrong. Could be the wrong number of writers, it could be the wrong identifiers, it could be the wrong shares, it could be wrong titles. And also what I see quite a bit with my catalog is multiple versions of the registration. And that's where that situation where we have multiple versions of the same registration, that to me is why the no data is better than the bad data. Because when you have multiple registrations, it means one party either has, let's say, identified a different role for a party, or it has the wrong parties or different parties, or the shares, right? And so now we have to not only assert our, let's say, truth with the society, but then also we have to get into this, claim resolution thing. We have to be able to communicate with our, let's say, joint work owners and come to, an agreement. And then the database then has to get rid of all those 5 registrations of the same work and land on one.
So it sounds to me like you're saying the answer then is yes, we have CMOs out there that have everything from incomplete to corrupted data. But the answer is to just go to the source. If I'm looking to claim my stuff, then let me tell you how to spell my name. Let me give you my address. Let me tell you registration numbers. Let me tell you all the numbers that I have that are associated with my work, where you can find me. And then if I've made a mistake, then they'll give me a reconciliation and say, well, hey, that's not what we've seen. So which of these is accurate? And then I say, oh, you're right. That was before I was writing under my stage name or whatever it may be. That was registered so long ago, it's this, that, or the other thing. So then I think it belies the people who say, well, I'd rather have bad data than no data. Well, that's not necessarily true unless you're going to be comparing that bad data to the good data.
True. Yeah. If you're not comparing it to anything, then it's just data. It's not good or bad.
But speaking of the writers entering their own information and being that sole root source, what are we going to do about these pseudonymous, anonymous avatar artists? You told me a great story. Well, great in that it was interesting, bad for him, story this past week about Marshmallow. Enlighten the folks about that one if they haven't heard it, because I think it demonstrates what could be a bigger issue.
So what we're seeing with, avatar artists are artists who have created let's say an image, a brand, and it's a fictitious brand or whatever entity. And many times those fictitious or avatar artists, they don't want their true identities, their true names associated with that character. And often those artists are also writers. And so I've had 3 of them come to me recently, and they do not want their real names in the, let's say, public facing portals of any of the PROs or MROs, performance rights, ASCAP BMI or MLC or HFA or anywhere. They don't want that in there. And there was a battle, or not even a battle, but a process where the artist went through, let's say BMI was the writer's PRO, and BMI went through the process of using the fictitious name, the pseudonymous name, but then that artist neglected to inform his co-writers that their PROs should not include his real name because they didn't realize that they were supposed to be using his pseudonymous name. So that led me to, recently there was a request for comments from the Copyright Office and it relating to what should be in the public facing database of the MLC. And, I do a lot of work with SONA, the Songwriters of North America, and their Sexy Metadata Action Group. And not just us, not just SONA, but a lot of the songwriter advocacy organizations have fought hard to make sure that the songwriter name is always there in these public facing databases, because the only thing that will never change is the writer. The writer will never change, right? And so that's always going to be a disambiguator. But what I hadn't realized was, wait a minute, in some cases, the writers don't want their names in there. So we have to be really careful that we are not forcing the writer to include his name. That has to be an opt-in. And this has also come up as in that same sort of rulemaking dialogue with regard to privacy issues and ex-US collective management organizations. And I think that the MLC has to be really, really careful and respectful of the sort of cultural and legal practices of those databases.
I think that is one of the things I was talking about when I said, sometimes when I talk to you, there's something that I haven't ever thought about. And then after we're done, it's all I'm worried about. And that's the bugaboo for the last week. It's been keeping me up. It hadn't occurred to me that all the parties involved in that could have done things how they perceived it to be the proper way, right? Let's make sure we use his right name so we can make sure he gets paid.
Right.
And it was the exact opposite of what that artist wanted. And somehow the information didn't get passed or lines got crossed. And so this isn't a case of incomplete data or even bad data. And that's coming from the root source, but it's still not exactly what they wanted done. And I see Jim Griffin in our chat saying we're always striving for perfect, but we're not quite there. I agree with him wholeheartedly. I think it's just really helpful to get as many of these issues out and spoken about as possible, because there could be someone somewhere, maybe Mr. Zisk, who I also see in the chat, who can say, well, I can come up with a solution for that pretty easily. Well, I can't think of it. I don't know what it is, but people as smart as him might be able to,
I just thought of something. I'm sorry to cut you off, but you just made me think of something. So and this relates to Jim and Brian and all those people who are database people, is, there's the IPI is the International Party Identifier, right? And there is a name number, an IPI name number, and an IPI base number. And the IPI base number is really not publicly accessible. It's very, very difficult actually to come by your IPI base number, which is essentially associated with your tax ID, right? That's the number that gets you paid. And then the IPI name number is really related to the various AKAs or PKAs. So for example, Abby North, that's one IPI name number, but then there's Abigail North. That's a different one. And both of those IPI name numbers point to the IPI base number. And if we were solely using publicly the name number and never publicly using the base number, everybody would have, these writers who want to be pseudonymous, there would be no problem because we'd have an identifier, right, that would allow us to make sure that that party is being paid based upon the link to its IPI base number. This is the one scenario I can think of where this is the first time I've ever actually landed on it being a good thing that the IPI base number isn't publicly accessible. Maybe that's a good thing.
Could be. For other reasons, it's a bad thing, but for this specific reason, it could help solve that issue. If you're talking about pseudonyms versus given names. Another thing that you brought up when we were talking, and this is adjacent to what we're talking about, is it goes back to accreditation. And for some people, accreditation is as important, if not more so, than royalty. They can use the accreditation and the acknowledgement for lots of different things that get monetized for them, either more efficiently or in volume, more so than the royalties that they may get. And it had always been in the back of my mind. I knew that was an issue. And I think going through the backs of CDs and looking through tapes to see who else were playing on these albums that I liked when I was growing up, I kind of knew that credits were super important. But I never realized it until it cauterized for me when you were talking about these things. Some people specifically don't want their names associated with things, and other people only want to make sure that they get the credit so that they can use it professionally, on their CV, on their resume as they shop themselves around. And I think it's an important distinction to make between royalty collection and accreditation.
So it's sort of funny, isn't it? You and I both started off as on the creative side, musicians, writers, and we were thrilled to receive that first check. The money was awesome. It was such a tremendous representation of or validation, let's say, that we did something good or well. But as again with this Sona thing, in speaking with a lot of the songwriters, it's not money that drives them, it's credit. And so I was, when I realized, because I kept trying to push, know your identifiers, know your IPI, know your ISRCs, know your ISWCs, and that's how you're going to get paid. And then it was sort of glossing over, and nobody wanted to deal with it at all. They just want to write songs, which makes perfect sense. But when I then said, well, don't you want credit and attribution? And they said, yes, they do. So I said, I was trying to sort of reframe how to push this information. And so my thought is, these identifiers, the IPIs, the ISRCs, the ISWCs, they actually drive credit and attribution. And that's in the context of, let's say, smart speakers. That's one format. If we deliver the data to Jaxsta, let's say, the IMDb or any other database for music, that assists with search and discovery. And when you have more search that leads to more discovery, then there's more royalties. So whether or not you're super motivated by the money or not, that credit and attribution actually does lead to money, royalties.
So Jim's challenging the notion that credits are artist data points. And he says so-called credits are assertions or claims and alleged facts. So I suppose everything at this point is an alleged fact, and sometimes even in the face of proof, people still use the term alleged. But when I was talking about attribution and accreditation, I guess what I'm talking about is an opportunity, not unlike what the Recording Academy recently rolled out, a chance for the people who are in front to recognize the people who are on the other side of the glass, as we call it, or on the board, so to speak. And I think that as it trickles down to now producers are able to collect royalties and own copyrights, and as it gets into recognizing people on the production team, I think that accreditation becomes more valuable to them. I'm not exactly sure how and where they'll use it now newly that they weren't before, but you know, in the circles that you run, and certainly in Nashville on Music Row where Tom is, the first time you get a job because someone referred you for that job is almost as important as the first time you get paid for a job. Because it's like, oh man, not only did they pay me, but it worked. I worked well. I liked them. They liked me. I could maybe make something out of this, you know? I did well. I connected with the people. I produced the project, whatever I did. And now I've got some legs under me. So I don't know if it means it's artist data for the same database that we're talking about, but I think in the big perspective, you've made me realize very recently that whereas I thought my goal was constantly to be educating the writers and the artists about how important it was to get their proverbial shit together, as I say, clean up your data and do the admin stuff so you can get paid, I was not meeting them where they were, which is something that I always talk about in my class to my students. You've got to meet people where they are, especially creative people. Understand them. If you want to help them, you've got to help them help themselves in a way that they think is valuable. And I myself had been talking around and past a lot of them until in the last couple of weeks, you made me really sit down and think about how am I valuing these things versus how are they valuing these things? And if I'm trying to help that group of people, I've got to try to put myself in their position more. And accreditation coming to the forefront is a big step in that direction, at least for me and for my business and my practice.
My first, so Tom had mentioned that I started my first production music library around 15 years ago. And there was a production company that I worked with a lot providing music, and they called me up and they said, you know, we need a music supervisor. Would you be interested? I'm like, sure. I have no idea what I'm doing, but yes, I'll totally do it. So that was my first show. And then as I was in the midst of that first show, another company called me and said, you know, we're working on this show and the broadcasters, they hate everything that we've given them, but they say they want something like that other show you're music supervising. So we looked you up and will you work with us? So it was absolutely based on credit, meaning that the fact that there was attribution and that other party was able to look for it and find it and reach out to me, that I had this, you know, part of my career has been doing music supervision. And by the way, I wanted to come back to, you know, just because somebody says they want to be pseudonymously credited, that doesn't actually mean that they don't want to be credited. It just means that they want, you know, control over the way they are credited and, let's say, branded.
Well, I think the biggest person who's doing that in the art space is Banksy, right? Not music, but certainly creative arts. And he's got his own issues that he runs into because of that, not the least of which is enforcing his IP. But you've got people that are constantly trying to name him and figure out who he is, and different theories that go around. That becomes part of the mystery, sure. But, you know, Marshmello or Daft Punk, however they want to perform, you've got to meet them where they are. And if that's how they want to perform and that's how they want to be registered, I don't see a problem with it, right? It all ends up numbers and associated with a bank account anyway. So,
you know, it kind of, you're making me think about the Tom Lehrer thing. So Tom Lehrer recently, right? He recently announced that, you know, all of his lyrics on his website are now in the public domain. And a lot of people were asked, well, why? And I think actually our friend Jim Griffin here said, well, people are talking about him now, aren't they? And right. I had coffee with a friend. We started talking about it. And he says, I didn't even know that Tom Lehrer was alive. And I was like, yeah, you do now, don't you? You know, so that's actually, like, I feel like I don't know Tom Lehrer, but I suspect that part of his motivation was wanting to make sure that he was getting credit, that people were noticing and remembering, and maybe even using his lyrics in more ways, more and new ways that would lead to him getting more credit and attribution.
And the Internet Archive stepped up and said, we'll catalog everything for you and we'll house it here, you know, for access by everyone. That being said, I don't know if you can just disclaim things like that. We talk a lot about whether or not copyright should be instantaneous. Can you disclaim copyright? It happens instantaneously and engenders in that work once it's fixed in the tangible medium. So I guess the answer is no. Public domain is really, it's a creature of statute. Once the time passes, it enters public domain. I guess what he's really saying is it's for free now and we won't be enforcing any type of infringement or anything like that.
But now you're a lawyer. So how does that work? If it's a joint work, can you actually, remove the lyric from the joint work and just say, okay, now this part of the joint work is in the public domain? Can you do that?
I guess you could always register your lyrics separately as if they were poems, right? In fact, many of them have been. Lots of songs have come from poems, and lots of songs get registered as a whole. But if the sound recording includes the lyrics, then the lyrics are also part of the copyright protections. Can he just extract them from the joint works? I don't know about that. But he's specifically saying his contributions, right? It's kind of like an Elton and a Bernie setup. Mm-hmm. Could Bernie say, well, my lyrics are available for free now? It really depends on how it's registered, right? If it says words and lyrics by Rodgers and Hammerstein, then they both get credit for both.
I've been having another conversation about the Tom Lehrer thing. And one of the things that struck me is, as music publishers, we are so heavily regulated, meaning the royalty types, mechanicals, performance, whatnot. But the two types that aren't are synchronization and lyric, reprint, digital lyric. And I thought, well, go ahead.
Talking about syncs and streaming, because that's going to eat up most of our time, I think. But I want to talk to you, speaking of being a publisher and speaking of lyrics being synced to video. And I don't know if you've had time to think about this, but YouTube is rife now with reaction videos. People who are supposedly not been exposed to works that are in genres, seminal works in those genres, but they have no experience viewing them. They're recording their first time watching a video or listening to a song. And I don't know if people know this, they should, but you administer one of the most covered and biggest songs that's ever been written, Unchained Melody. That is subject to a reaction video. As a publisher, what is your view on that? And how do you approach those YouTube reaction videos from a rights standpoint?
Mm-hmm. So my father-in-law wrote Unchained Melody. It was for it was the theme to a movie that he had scored, and the producers liked the theme, and then they asked for a lyric, and so he went to an old army buddy and said, "Hey, will you write the lyric?" This was some 60 years ago, 65 years ago. Unchained Melody is a song that is like a cultural icon, but it still needs to reach new audiences, and new audiences mean, younger people. It means, across musical genres. It means across cultures. So in general, with a song that's 60 years old, we can be more flexible with allowing uses than maybe if it was a brand new song and we were trying to create an audience for the first time. So in general, I'm not automatically take down. That's just not my thing. But, when it was that, there were these two young guys and they were listening to Bobby Hatfield and Bill Medley's recording, the Righteous Brothers, for the first time.
Right.
And the just sheer glee and wonderment and appreciation of not just the track, but Bobby Hatfield's vocal was magical. It gives me chills right now, actually. It's magical. That's what the song is. That's what the performance is. When somebody does that organically, I am all for it. And in that context, I didn't release my claim, but I'm certainly not going to take it down. And by not releasing my claim, I mean, I'm still going to monetize it, right? That kind of what feels to me, so that's a completely visceral response, subjective response on my part. There's nothing objective about it. I had a feeling, and that feeling made me want to see it go on and on and on. But then what happened is there's been this proliferation of these reaction videos. It seems as if a lot of creators have heard, hey, you can do these reaction videos and it might be fair use, and therefore the rights holders might release their claims and you might be able to monetize. That upsets me. It upsets me if somebody's trying to, if I get the feeling that somebody's trying to swoop on my royalties or my family's royalties, or, somebody that I've got a fiduciary responsibility for, I'm not going to let it go. So my first move is to substantiate or confirm the fact that I have a claim, and I'm not going to let the reactor monetize. And then if they push back, then I have to take it down. Taking down is not my first choice. I really want people to hear Unchained Melody and, become familiar with it and love it and play it at their weddings and do all the things that, drive my father-in-law's credits, but also, my kids' schools, right? So, and by the way, I don't think it's fair use when somebody is playing the entire video. If it was, let's say, I don't think it's transformative. I don't think it's real commentary. And so I don't consider it fair use.
Simply me showing my reaction to your father-in-law's song, probably not transformative.
Probably not.
I think I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, yes, it was 50, what'd you say, 60 years ago?
1954, so 66.
So, but in the 80s, it was part of one of the biggest movie syncs that I can recall in Top Gun. That's one of the biggest things that was going down. And then you've got now that makes me think about this thing with Fleetwood Mac and the skateboarder and the cranberry juice. And a reporter called me and asked me if I would give him a quote about how new medium are making bands like Fleetwood Mac relevant again. And my quote for him was, I reject your premise that Fleetwood Mac is irrelevant.
I gotta say something though. Sorry, somebody had posted, in response to that same video, right? On LinkedIn, I saw this. It was a post. And it was like, okay, so what's more important? Is it the song? Is it the video? What causes or creates that virality, right? And in that context, like my answer is, and by the way, Bob Zarrett, who is our partner in Unchained Melody Publishing, his father, Hy Zarrett, wrote the lyric to Unchained. So I'm actually really honored that Bob is here. Anyway, all I could think of is Unchained Melody, Ghost, right?
Yeah.
Unchained Melody had been recorded 100 times at least before the Righteous Brothers recorded their cover in 1965. So they were not the first, they were not the original, but that's the master that was used in this movie, in this scene that has become absolutely iconic, right? So I firmly believe that without Ghost, Unchained Melody would not be doing the numbers that it does. So I believe that when you have the luxury, when you're given the gift of having an iconic movie scene be associated with your song, that's the gift that will give for decades. And
Right.
I am so thankful that it happened. It's interesting when we get sync requests, because so many of the sync requests we get are parodies of the Ghost scene, the Ghost Clay scene. And I have to think that with Dreams, listen, Fleetwood Mac is one of my favorite bands. Landslide's my favorite song in the world ever. So I have a very powerful association with Fleetwood Mac. But seeing Dreams in that context brought it back to me. It made me play it again.
Right.
And I think that we're going to see more. I think we'll see some parody syncs based on that viral video.
You're probably right. And I think my initial reaction might have missed the point of his question, because it does deliver it just like sync in a huge 80s movie delivers that song to the next generation of people and now has further and further iterations. It delivers the song to people that otherwise wouldn't have come across it. But that being said, I still think it's difficult for me to say that they were ever irrelevant when Rumors is like the third highest selling album of all time.
Listen, irrelevant is not a word that I would have used. Not for any of them.
Let's finish up with YouTube real quick before we get to what I think is the biggest topic. And we're probably going to run out of time before we come up with a solution for it. But I think that right now, let's say you didn't have that same visceral reaction, or maybe now there's too many copycats and you're like, this has gone on. It doesn't feel genuine to me anymore. It's not serving the song. it's not serving the art. It's not serving fair use. So I'm going to have to send out strike notices, right? Takedown notices. You can monetize it through YouTube and play within the YouTube rules and their structure. Or when you start to send DMCA takedown notices, you're introducing the federal copyright scheme to the gambit there. I think it's important for people, especially rights holders, to remember the difference between content ID and copyright infringement claims, and how they don't necessarily serve the same masters, right? And so I think you're the perfect person to talk from a rights holder's perspective. When is it proper to push that button and when isn't it? And how does the content ID serve you and the rights holders?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny because YouTube gets so much crap for its content ID, and it's certainly not perfect. Nothing's perfect, but boy, oh boy, like the number of uses that it does find for us that I can then review and make that decision, right, about whether to assert my claim or release or do a takedown is tremendous. But the thing that we see with Unchained Melody that is, extremely offensive is there's, for example, a Hitler documentary, and they use Unchained Melody as their main title theme. There's no question for me when it comes up, that's an immediate takedown.
That's not.
Immediate. That's me using my DMCA rights and getting, I don't want that anywhere. In fact, I think it's wrong. I think this is one of the ways in which the DMC should be updated is if I take it down once, YouTube should have it down everywhere. It should never come up again. And the idea that I have to play whack-a-mole and I have to keep seeing it, finding it, taking it down, that's wrong to me. That's one of my major beefs. But moving on. So, there's other kinds of, we're not like, I would say, with Bob and me, when it comes to like what we would restrict or not restrict, it's not necessarily a cut and dry black and white kind of a thing. So we discuss it a lot. But certainly not Nazis. That's not hard. That's an easy one. But I also, I got kids, and when I see some of the like softcore porn stuff come up, first of all, it's not licensed, meaning the original sync use is not licensed. But secondly, like, I don't want that. So I take that stuff down.
Right.
That's not so cool with me, but unless it's like something, this is me. If it's hyper violent, I don't want it. If it's extremely offensive, I don't want it. We had one, not Unchained Melody, but this is a different catalog. I mean, it's a, legacy master recording, really, really well-known artist and producer. And somebody had used the master recording it was essentially a political, not presidential, but it was related to a sheriff, right? And it was supportive of, or I actually don't remember if it was supportive or against, but I went to my client and I said, I don't know what to do with this. What would your dad want? And she's like, he would be livid, take it down. Now, it happened to be an issue that I supported personally, right? The content of the video. So I wrote to the guy, the creator, and I said, listen, you have to take the song, you have to take this recording out of your video, and you got to do it right away, or I'm going to have to take your video down. And I don't want to take your video down, so please remove our recording from it. And he did. And to me, like, if we have the time, if we have the ability to communicate like that. And by the way, that's another one within these content ID tools. It would be so much better if we could actually have these kinds of communications within the portal, because I had to do some work to track down the guy, and to find him on, Facebook or whatever, and then figure out how to send him an instant message, that kind of stuff, right? It would be way better if that communication if we could facilitate that communication within those CMS tools.
So we're not going to get a chance to talk about the difference between direct advocacy and lobbying. Unfortunately, it's important and interesting to me, but I want people to know that you're doing good work with and on behalf of SONA for the writers out there. So when we talk about rights holders and writers, a lot of times people want to make a distinction, a differentiation between, rights holders aren't the actual creators. Well, I think you illustrated pretty well how, yeah, sure, it's an LLC that owns the rights, and it's not the gentleman who actually wrote the music, but it's still very personal to you. And the choices you're making are still very personal and organic. You're not just saying, well, they didn't offer us enough, so it's a takedown. And you're approaching each of them with nuance. And I appreciate that. And I think it's important for people to know that rights holders out there are not just sending out blanket takedown notices without considering things. There are rights holders that are looking at things organically and holistically. And I really appreciate your approach to things like that, because I think that there are things that are out there that I've enjoyed that do espouse the same beliefs that I have, that I can pretty much tell are not licensed, or at least going to be infringing if they make it out into commerce when people find out about them. But I think that if everybody took the time, and I know it's very difficult, but to address things in a manner that allows for the context of the use in the video, leaving out aside litigation and fair use, but just for purposes of allowing things to be online, on YouTube, on the internet, you can serve yourself as well, right? Because you can help use this UGC, as they call it, user-generated content, to help take your brand or craft the message of your brand in the next direction, or expand it. And so I think the people who are advocating for UGC are probably right. That's the next wave of it. Maybe my response to the writer was short-sighted. I think your response is much more thought out, and I appreciate that. But let's get to something that doesn't have an answer, at least not yet. We've got about 15 minutes left, which is not going to be enough time to talk about this, but this is probably the biggest question I've gotten from everybody that I've interacted with in the last 6 months, including today at this venue. The gentleman who helped me set up the AV for this asked me, when you're done, can we talk about this? And it's about, what rights do we need to secure to broadcast a show for live stream? This Space Fair Theater is coming back with some shows. You can see the socially distanced seats behind me. They got a couple hundred they're gonna be able to put in here, but they want to offer it online. How do we make sure we're covering ourselves? And so I want to do a little role play with you where I will pretend to be manager. Let's say I'm a manager of an artist who's going to put on a show. And I'm going to ask you basic questions, and we'll see how far in this we can get, okay? My artist wants to put on a live stream. I think we can make some money, and I think we can raise some money for this nonprofit. We want to use the song that you administer. We want to use a lot of the Righteous Brothers catalog, and we want to intersperse some other cover songs with our originals. Where do we start? How do we get the rights from you? And what rights do we need?
Do I control all the Righteous Brothers rights in this game?
Yes, since we're living in the fantasy world, yes, you have all of them.
The other day I got to be part of the Beatles in one of these mock scenarios. So I like these.
You're doing
yeah. So we have obviously the composition, which needs to be cleared. And we're assuming that there isn't a sound recording. We're going to assume that the artist, let's say, isn't signed to a label that might have exclusive rights on the artist. So let's simplify it. Let's say it's an independent artist, so we can lose the master side of things. So on the composition side, this is an ongoing debate, I think. Initially, I feel like we all thought, well, the live stream is a performance. And then if you then, let's say, make that live stream an archived video, that becomes then performance and sync. And there's many people I see in this chat who have been involved in these discussions, and I do believe it's a debate, because I don't believe that there's cut and dry copyright law that would define any of this. So I think that as an industry, we're going to have to decide, not just within the US, by the way, but globally, because certainly the construct of sync as a right is a very US thing, and it would be reproduction in most territories outside of the US. So we have to acknowledge that. And this is so complicated. So what rights do you need? Well, if it's a US server, let's say it's solely US, it's never going to go outside of the US. I would go.
But okay.
Let's just start with the US.
We're already off into a tangent though, because once it's on the internet, who knows where, but okay.
Well, let's just say that it's going to live on a US server forever, and anybody who accesses it is going to access it from a US server.
Okay.
In my opinion, the industry is gravitating to the understanding that, in fact, the live stream requires both the performance and a reproduction license.
Okay.
And let's call it US. Let's say that the initial use is sync and performance and reproduction. And then let's say that perhaps the archive version is then performance and sync.
Let me pause you there. I told you, oh, we're not archiving it. It's not going to be available except for people who log in right in that moment and watch.
I think there's an argument to be made that there's no right that needs to be cleared directly from the publisher. And that's speaking, obviously I'm a publisher and many publishers can be like, what the hell is she talking about? But I also have to put, the advocacy part of me, and in fact, just my own personal perspective on this. If I'm just performing, and I don't mean just performing, but if I'm in that initial performance, it's a performance, right? If it was live at the venue you're sitting at, it's a performance license, and the venue probably has that license, and it's taken it out from, let's say, ASCAP or BMI or whomever is the PRO, right? And I understand absolutely the arguments about the reproduction, but I think that if we're going there, okay, fine, let's go there. But then we got to make sure that the platforms have the license for both the performance and the reproduction. Because I think what we don't, in my feeling is this: we want to support performance, right? First of all, I miss live performance. I miss music. So I'm very supportive of live streams. And in fact, like the Billie Eilish thing over the weekend was just, it was so awesome. It made the weekend and I was so impressed. I want more music. So I'm supportive of making the licensing as simple and easy as possible. So let's define what it is as an industry. Is it going to be a performance and a reproduction? Fine. If that's what it is, then let's make sure that the platforms have these licenses, because you're coming back to your, the game we're playing here. So how do I get it if the platform doesn't have it? Well, first of all, I got to find out if the platform does have it. So that's the first issue, is how do I find out if the platform has the license, right? And that's an obstacle right now. One way you could do it, at least part of the license, is by looking.
We're going to put My Artist Show on Facebook, Instagram Live. That's where we're going to go.
Yeah, that's almost impossible for us as a Joe average to identify whether, well, if I see that song performed anywhere on Facebook or Instagram, I can assume there has been that the publisher says, okay, we approve. The problem is I can't tell for sure whether that okay, we approve was given to the platform or was given to the artist performing or whose video is living on that platform.
How about this then? It's not going to be on Facebook or Instagram. It's going to be on my website, and I'm going to charge for a password where you can log in and you can watch it for 24 hours and then it's gone.
That's great. That's a great scenario. So absolutely, you go to the publisher and you say, this is what I'm doing. And then that publisher, this is another, this is the part of the conversation you and I have been having, and not just you and me, but others, well, maybe we just say, it's just a bundle of rights. We're just giving you the right to do this. And it doesn't matter what rights you want to sort of identify as being bundled in this. We're just saying it's okay. And here's how much we're going to charge you. But that license would be obtained directly from the publishers.
I think that there are so many permutations to this, from I click on my Instagram Live and do a couple songs, including a couple covers, to we go into a place like this, go on stage and record 2 full sets as if it's a live show, and then they're accessible via password on our website. We sell tickets and merch and everything. Everything in between those two is also happening, including all of those things happening at the same time. Is it just too much for everyone to sort through? And are you advocating, forget about consensus as to what rights are necessary. Let's get a cohesive right, just one,
yes,
whatever, streaming or online performance, whatever you want, and say, whatever it is that's covered or needs to be covered, we're all agreeing it's covered in this right. Is that?
I absolutely advocate. That would be what I would support. And I know there are people who disagree, but I support that because I believe, first of all, the more opportunities, the more we can make the opportunity available for more people or more artists to perform our songs, the better we are. And again, looking at, let's say, an Unchained Melody, we want people performing the song. I want kids who are just growing up or people living in any territory. I want them to have Unchained Melody in their cultural zeitgeist. I want everybody performing the song. I'm going to make it as easy as possible. unless there's an objectionable use, we want to make it easy for the users to license. And so, yes, forget what, let's not let's not worry about the, specifics of every single right that might need to be licensed, but let's bundle it into one.
So in your work, you deal with, you mentioned it here today, but you and I talk about it a lot, estates, legacy artists, things like that. In our Q&A, Andrew has a question. He says, what of the case where a lost copy of a standout live performance pops up? Say it's a good recording of a memorable performance. The recorder has since died, meaning the person who shot the footage has died. That person's relatives find it among their possessions and they release it. Sensible to quash rekindling of that old performance thought to be lost? Or, I'll add to his question, allow it to live on so that it breathes new life into that legendary performance? What's your take on it from an administrative standpoint?
That's such a great scenario. I love that. Well, first of all, I'm a music fan. So if there's like, the lost recordings, I'm all over that. I want it. I want to see it. I want it out there and I want to make it available. I might though say, you don't own it. And so therefore I'm going to monetize the composition and that will be the only, let's say, asset or the only part of it that's going to be monetized. I will monetize it. So I wouldn't take it down. If they said, well, we insist on monetizing, then we would have to negotiate. But in general, I would be absolutely supportive and we would make sure that the negotiation benefited both sides.
I think that goes back to your approach, and obviously your approach is specific to those circumstances and the way you're viewing the use then. It's an interesting question because in some other groups that I work with, we talk about legacy writers, not necessarily performers, but also some of these old R&B doo-wop groups. They don't have any writing associated with them at all. All they get is performance fees. Essentially, they get paid to show up and be the guys that they've always been, right?
I have to revise what I said. I want the performers to receive some money.
Okay.
So I got to make sure in my negotiation that the performers also receive some type of compensation, which is really difficult in these UGC platforms, which rely on a sound recording owner. Yeah. So somehow in my fantasy world, I would be able to say, as the composition owner, we want this, but we also want the performers to be receiving a certain amount or percentage.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, we're not going to come up with answers necessarily. I think as far as not archived footage, but maybe beamed footage, whether or not it's actually live can be left for the next time, because I suspect that most of the great live streams you've seen, and I know the ones that I've been a part of, have at least a component that's recorded just in case. We can either switch to it real quick, or it's running in the background or running parallel, and we can't risk necessarily somebody's phone dies or something like that, because we've already sold a bunch of tickets. Mm-hmm. Even when they're live, they're not necessarily live, I guess is what I'm saying. And especially when, rock and roll never starts at 8 o'clock. And when this show starts exactly at 8, it's recorded.
Again, let's make it a bundle of rights, the right to use or the right to perform or the right to whatever we want to call it. To me, that is the easiest, most frictionless method. It doesn't mean we don't get paid. We get paid. But it means that we don't have to sort of spend so much time and energy kind of arguing or debating over what specific rights are included in this bundle. Again, like, I do not think that live streaming is going anywhere. Yeah. I can absolutely see once we're back in that theater you're sitting in, that there would also be, a simultaneous live stream feed. And I'm so grateful that that's possible now and that it's a thing, because that means, you're in Philadelphia and I can see whatever performance it is that you're seeing in person, that I could see it at the same time while I'm sitting here in Los Angeles. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It could really actually be one of the silver linings to pull out of all this, because it could enable you and I to attend the same show at the same time without having to meet in Vegas or meet in Chicago or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think positively, but I agree with you that it's here to stay. This venue and all the others that I've spoken to have said, we're wired for it and we're ready for it when it comes back. There will be different tiers for pricing. And when I log off here, I'm going to talk to these guys about what they might need to ensure to make sure that their venue license covers it. I don't know the answer. And if it does, I bet when they first came up with it, it hadn't been a thing. So we're going to have to just kind of throw ourselves into it, I think, and see what works and what doesn't. But eventually, if rights holders, venue holders, writers, and performers all get bogged down in trying to pull on different ends of these little sticks that are part of the bundle, it's never going to work. Lots of smarter people than me always say, simplify it, make it easier, more people will come to it. If you price it right, you'll get the best bang for your buck. And I think that's probably the answer. We just all have to sit down and figure out what that means.
Yes. Yeah. And I do think that we do have to have, sorry, I know we're running out of time, but I do think it's crucial that the rights holders do have the ability to negotiate that rate. And I don't think it should be regulated because that's gotten us into trouble.
Well, maybe if we can all agree on it being a new right, then we can just eliminate it from being part of compulsory licensing and just have direct licenses that happen and really see what the market bears on all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree.
All right. Well, we're 1 minute over, but I want to thank you for letting me do this in front of everybody. Normally, I just do it over the phone. And I think you and I have a call scheduled for tomorrow anyway that I'll continue to pump you for information on. But I want to throw it back to Tom. Thanks, Abby, for letting us do this. I really appreciate you all the time, not just today.
Likewise, Kevin. Thanks so much. And Tom, thank you so much for including us.
Well, right on. And back at you guys. Thank you for indulging us with your wisdom and your time. You've got a lot of fans in the chat, and you've probably made some new ones today. So thank you. It's also clear to me that there's a lot of unfinished business here, and I'm wondering if I might lure you two back into these seats at some point in the near future, maybe part 2 of this conversation.
Would love that.
Yeah, we can do that.
All right. Well, great. We will have to figure out a time and place. I'm suffering from an embarrassment of riches in terms of scheduling these events. In fact, our next one is this Thursday, and it starts at 1 o'clock Eastern time, an hour earlier, and it features Ola Sars, who is the founder of Soundtrack Your Brand. He's also the co-founder of Beats Music. He'll be dialing in from his home in Stockholm, Sweden, which is why we are doing it an hour earlier. So tune in. Folks, let me conclude by once again thanking the audience for their participation, for Kevin and Abby for their wisdom, and encourage everyone to be nice to each other and vote your ass off on November 3rd.
And where?
Take care, folks.
Thank you so much.